Most women think the thing that stays with a man after a date is the conversation. What she said, how funny she was, whether they had chemistry. It isn't. It's the hug. And here's the part nobody talks about. I'm not a coach. I'm not a dating expert. I'm a man over 60 who's been on the receiving end of a lot of hugs in this second chapter of life. And I can tell you something that no article, no podcast, no well-meaning friend has ever actually said out loud. The way most women hug at this stage of life isn't cold, it isn't disinterested. It comes from somewhere much older and much more understandable than that. And if you've been doing it, it is not your fault. Nobody ever explained what was actually happening on the other side of that hug. In this video, I'm going to talk about 3 things that quietly close a door before either person has said a word. Then I'm going to tell you about something else. The one thing I've almost never heard anyone describe from the man's side. The thing that stayed with me for days after a walk that lasted maybe 2 hours. I drove home that night thinking about it. Not about what we'd talked about. Not about what might happen next. Just those 4 seconds. Just the way she was completely quietly there. Stay with me, because that part is the one that changes how you think about all of this. A hug at 60 is not about attraction. It's about feeling safe enough to stay. I want to start with something a little uncomfortable. When I was in my 30s, a hug was about excitement, about chemistry, about whether she moved closer or pulled back. I was paying attention, even if I pretended I wasn't. That's not what a hug is at 60. After my divorce, after the years it took me even to want to be close to someone again, I noticed something had shifted. Not just in me. In every conversation I had with men my age who were dating again. What we talked about was never, is she attractive enough? It was always something quieter, something harder to name. Is she glad I'm here? That's the question a man over 60 is asking in the first few seconds of physical contact. Not consciously, he's not running through a checklist. But his body is listening for one thing, whether he is welcome here or tolerated. The 2018 report from ARP Research found that more than 1/3 of adults over 45 reported feeling lonely regularly, and that number climbed with age. What it also found, quietly buried in the data, was that the longing wasn't just for company. It was for physical presence. For someone to actually be there. That changes what a hug means. At 25, a hug can be a test, a flirtation, a signal sent and received. At 63, a hug is something closer to "do you see me, and are you glad you do?" I'm not saying attraction disappears. It doesn't. But it moves to the back of the room. What steps forward is something older and more honest. The need to feel that your presence is not just noticed, but wanted. And here's what I've come to understand through my own stumbling around in this second chapter. Most women don't know this has changed. They're still bracing for the version of men they knew at 40. The ones who needed to be chased or managed or read carefully. The man standing in front of you now is asking a simpler question. He just wants to know if it's safe to stay. So if that's what he's quietly looking for, the next question matters a lot. What does a hug actually do to that feeling? What breaks it before either of you has a chance to say a word? Because some of the things that push him away are the last things you'd expect. And the first one is something almost every woman I know has done, including the ones who were absolutely trying their best. The pat on the back doesn't say I don't like you. I want to tell you about a hug I received about a year into dating again. We'd had a long dinner, good conversation, easy laughter, the kind of evening that makes you remember why any of this is worth trying. At the end of the night, when we said goodbye, she hugged me, and then she patted my back, twice, firmly. Like I was a colleague at a company retreat, I drove home thinking about it. Not in an injured way, more like trying to read a sentence I wasn't sure I understood. Here's what I did not think. She doesn't like me. I'd just spent 3 hours with this woman. I knew she liked me. What I thought was something quieter and harder to shake. She doesn't quite know if she's allowed to. That distinction matters more than people realize. The pat on the back is one of the most misread signals in all of this. From the outside, it looks like distance. And yes, on a purely physical level, it is distance. But I've come to understand, after many conversations with women who are navigating this stage of life, that it rarely comes from indifference. It comes from something much older than that. Most women over 60 have spent decades in situations where showing too much warmth too quickly to the wrong person has cost them something. A marriage where affection became a currency that got spent badly. A relationship where being open meant being taken for granted. The body remembers those lessons, even when the mind has moved on. Bessel van der Kolk, a psychiatrist, who spent decades studying how people carry difficult experiences in their bodies, wrote that the body holds on to protective patterns long after the original threat is gone. You don't decide to pat someone's back instead of holding them. Your arms just do it, because somewhere along the way, holding on became something that felt risky. I'm not saying this to let anyone off the hook. I'm saying it because I've done the same thing with my own hands. There were women I hugged in those early months after my divorce, where I know, looking back, that I was performing the hug rather than actually doing it. Keeping myself just far enough away to feel safe. The pat on the back is not a rejection. It's a habit built out of self-protection. The man standing in front of you, if he's been around long enough, probably understands that, even if he can't quite name what he felt. Understanding where it comes from doesn't make it land differently on the receiving end, though. It still reads as distance, and that's worth knowing. Now, the pat hug is one thing. It's visible. You can feel it happening even as it's happening. But the next one is harder to catch, because it's over before you've even had a chance to notice. And I think it comes from the same place, just expressed differently. It's the hug that ends before it really begins. Pulling away fast isn't about not caring. There's a particular kind of hug that I think does the most quiet damage. And it's the hardest one to talk about, because from the outside it looks completely fine. The arms are there, the timing is there, nothing is technically wrong. But the person isn't. I've been on the receiving end of this more times than I care to count. You can feel it immediately, in a way that's almost impossible to describe. The body is present. The mind is somewhere else entirely, maybe running through what she's going to say next, maybe aware of someone across the room, maybe just caught in that low hum of anxiety that makes it hard to be anywhere fully. It's what I've come to think of as the hug where nobody shows up. And here's the thing I want to say carefully, because I don't want this to sound like a critique. I've done this too. There were years in my marriage where I hugged my wife while my head was already 3 steps ahead, where the physical closeness became so automatic that I stopped actually being in it. We were 2 people going through the motions of connection without either of us noticing it had drained away. Robin Norwood, who spent years working with women in long-term relationships, wrote about how people in difficult or emotionally exhausting partnerships often learn to be physically present while protecting themselves emotionally. It's not a choice, exactly. It's adaptation. The nervous system figures out how to participate without being fully exposed. That's what the checked-out hug is. It's not coldness, it's armoring. And after years of practicing that, of learning to be somewhere else while your body goes through the motions, it doesn't just stop when the relationship ends. You carry it with you into the next one. Your arms know the shape of a hug. Your presence doesn't always follow. What I felt on those occasions when a woman hugged me and was genuinely completely there was something I didn't have a word for at first. It wasn't exciting. Exactly. It was more like relief. Like something I'd been holding without knowing it finally had somewhere to land. That's what presence does. It doesn't have to be grand. It doesn't require any particular skill. It just requires that you actually be in the same moment as the other person. For 3 seconds. That's all. And I know how hard that is, especially when part of you is still wondering if it's safe to be there at all. So we've talked about 3 ways a hug can close a door without anyone meaning to: the pat, the rush, the absence. And I realize those might feel a little heavy to sit with. So I want to spend the last part of this telling you about the one that opens it, not a technique. Just a moment I still think about, and what I think it was actually made of. The most painful hug is the one where both people are physically there and emotionally somewhere else entirely. I want to tell you about a woman I met about 2 years after my divorce. We'd been talking for a few weeks. Easy, unhurried. The kind of getting to know someone that doesn't feel like an audition. One evening, after a walk that went longer than either of us planned, she hugged me goodbye. She didn't do anything special. There was no technique to it. Her arms came around me with a kind of quiet intention, like she had actually decided to do this, like it wasn't just a reflex. She took one slow breath. I could feel it. And then she stayed, just a moment longer than I expected, before she stepped back and looked at me. Not a performance, just a look. I drove home that night thinking about it. Not about what we'd talked about, not about what came next. Just that moment, that handful of seconds sitting quietly in me like something I hadn't realized I'd been missing. I've tried to understand what made it different, and the honest answer is that she was just there. Completely. For those 3 or 4 seconds, nothing else was competing for her attention. She wasn't managing how she looked, or planning her exit, or wondering what I thought. She was just in it. That kind of presence is rarer than people think. Not because it requires any particular gift, but because most of us, by the time we reach this stage of life, have spent years learning to be somewhere else while our bodies go through the motions. It's a survival skill, and like a lot of survival skills, it's hard to put down even when you don't need it anymore. Researcher Brené Brown, who has spent years studying human connection, makes a distinction I've thought about often. She talks about the difference between being present and being comfortable. Presence means you're actually in the moment with another person, not watching yourself from a slight distance, not editing in real time. Most of us are comfortable at connection. Very few of us are actually present for it. What that woman gave me in 4 seconds was presence, and it stayed with me for days. I'm not telling you this to give you a checklist. Breathe here. Hold longer there. Look at him when it ends. That's not the point. The point is the decision that comes before any of that. The small, quiet choice to actually show up for the moment instead of supervising it from a safe distance. That's what he'll remember. Not the perfect thing you said, not how you looked. Those few seconds where you were just completely, genuinely there. And here's what I've learned, slowly, on my own. You can't give that to someone else until you believe you're worth showing up for yourself. That's really where I want to leave you today. Not with a technique, not with a list of things to practice before your next dinner. Just with that one idea. That presence is already in you. It just needs permission to come forward. And I want to ask you something. If you're willing to sit with it for a moment, I'd love to hear from you if you're willing. Has there ever been a moment, a hug, a hand on your arm, someone simply staying close a little longer than expected, where you felt, even just for a second, like you were completely welcome, where you didn't have to manage anything? Tell me about it in the comments. Read every single one.